God of War, The Magpie Murders, and Jurassic Perk. This is Staying In.
The thing that's really got me sort of pumped is that it's still light outside. Like, usually when we're recording at like 7ish or whatever, it's totally dark, but now it's like light.
You're so pumped that you've got your curtains drawn.
Well, I could open them, couldn't I? Hold on. The problem is, otherwise the neighbourhood children look in and they sort of peer in through the window and see me talking into a microphone.
I mean, you could just put on a shirt and it wouldn't be so awkward.
And trousers.
Remember that episode where your Tesco shopping arrived midway, and Dan and I were waving to the Tesco's delivery person, and he clocked us.
Oh God!
Does anyone? What was everyone's favourite? Let's call them "It's Still Light Outside" game. So let's think. Kerby was probably my favourite one as a kid.
Kerby.
Did you never play Kerby?
As in the little pink Nintendo guy.
No, Kerby spelt with a C.
Oh right. Is this one of these like post office knockoff toy things?
No, it's what part of the lead up to this question do you not understand? As a child,
most of it.
As a child, what was your favourite? It's still lighty evening fun games. I don't know, like Rally 1, 2, 3 or Kerby. I mean, those are the only two I played, so those are the only two I can talk about.
Sam, you're labouring under the misapprehension that Pete played outside when he was a child, because we had a blisteringly hot bank holiday weekend.
We did.
We all sent images out of what we were doing. Sam, you were in the garden with Poppy. Lovely day. I was out gallivanting around Wales. Pete sent us a photo from his living room, which appeared to be a very intensive RPG you were currently engaged in.
Oh no, not at all. I was at the office, which we had decided that we'd pulled all the tables together, and we were playing Bushido, a miniatures war game, and like it was boiling in there.
But was it as good as Kerby?
Yeah, what is Kerby?
So as far as I remember, and Dan will probably correct me on this, is you had a football. It's a 2-player game. I guess you could play in other teams if you wanted to, but it was essentially a 2-player game. So me and my brother would play on the curb outside our house, and you'd have both players on either side of the curb, and
one player either side of the road.
Other side of the road, and would you walk to the centre of the road? Hence, it was the 90s, danger, and
it was the M5 motorway.
And you wouldn't walk to the middle of the road, would you?
You would be either side of it. There was no ceremonial coming together in the centre where you bowed at each other and stepped back.
The Christmas truce.
So if you threw the ball from your side of the curb, and if it hit their curb and came back to you, then you got a point, and it was your go again. But if they were able to intercept the ball at any point, then it was like their serve. And then if you threw the ball and it hit the curb and it came back to you without landing on the floor, then in our version of the game we got to walk to the middle of the road and have like a free hit. Like it was like you've done a really good thing. And then and here's a twist. If when you're in the middle of the road you threw the ball and somehow your brother, because it was just my brother, got the ball, and as you're running away back to your side of the curb, they could throw the ball and hit you in the back, they got 5 points. I'm sure the rules are somewhere online, but that was...
I played a similar game. My version of the game didn't have a 30-page rule book, which Sam seems to have had. My version of the game was one person standing either side of the road. You have a football, and you take it in turns to kick the football, and you have to hit the curb. Obviously, if you hit that curb, kind of without it bouncing prior to that, it will bounce back to you. You get a point, and then obviously you get another go because it's come back to you. And it's a game of just trying to get as many points as possible going either side of the road. So if you miss, if it lands too short or too far, then it's the other person's go. And that was the game. We didn't have kind of these rules where you had to hop into the middle and close your eyes and turn around 3 times and jump up and down.
That's in the official Kerby rules. If the ball hits a curb cleanly and bounces back to the player, then they score a point. Having scored, they keep the ball and move to the middle of the road and attempt the same again.
I mean, I can't really see it on Sky Sports.
I mean, I'm very impressed at this. I'm trying to think about what games we used to play. We used to play Manhunt quite a lot.
What, like the video game, or
on the mean streets of Royal Tunbridge Wells. No, it was more like Manhunt, as in the game that you might play in the Scouts, where basically it's kind of like hide and seek, but you're pretending that it's more than that because you're 15 or whatever. And like it was the kind of thing where you could go pretty, like basically we could go pretty wide. Like there was the whole local neighbourhood area. It's like a little suburby area. Then there was a whole park, and then a woods at the back of most of the kids that lived in my street's gardens. And then that went further out into another place.
Then you could get a taxi.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
I mean, Pete's still playing this game now.
Really far. Yeah,
we never found him.
It went really. That's why I moved to Bristol. Yeah, I mean, like it was pretty intense actually. And those, I do remember those going on for hours and hours and hours. And then just as it was getting darker and darker and darker, it meant that you could do more like intense things, like you could climb up trees and hide in plain sight and stuff like that. Oh, it was great.
I remember a game, and I don't remember why it was called this, and so maybe someone will remember it being called this, and maybe it was just a Birmingham thing. But it was called.
Oh no, is this going to be a dodgy racist thing? Like,
yeah, is this
Wacky 123? That rings a bell. Dan.
What was it called?
I think it was a similar thing to what you're talking about, where it was kind of like a hide and seek / TIG hybrid, where everyone would hide, and then whoever was on would try and find them. But the person hiding, had to get back to a central point.
Yeah, we called that Rally 123.
Pardon?
We called that Rally 123.
Okay, so yeah, we would call that Aki 123. I don't quite know where that name comes from. It may have just been my road, but that was what we would play. But similar to Sam,
the entire street.
Yeah,
like no matter what their age.
But to be fair, I lived by a
We're
park
playing
as well,
Anti-Teen. So. Come on, everyone, Aki 123. Come on, John. We were all playing. I was watching snooker.
The Purge.
Last one left dies, gets killed at Dan's Butcher's.
Oh, God. Where did you live, Dan?
Well, hang on a minute. You're the one who's getting taxis to try to hide away from people you live with.
Oh, man. But those were like, if you were allowed, like you knew when you were a kid, I'm staying out later than I should really be allowed out because it's still light, and therefore there's no danger. Yeah. Like that was always the thing as well. It was like, oh, it's light out, therefore there's clearly no danger. Like clearly nothing bad has ever happened in daylight.
Except for the time I went out cycling without any socks on, and I got my ankle caught in the wheel, and because I wasn't wearing any socks, it just like the wheel just grinded up against my ankle.
Oh, why?
Got your ankle caught in the wheel.
What were you doing? Cycling wrong.
How wide are the spokes?
I can't remember how it happened, but to that day, I've never, ever gone cycling without any socks on.
That's where it's like knee-high socks. Whenever he goes.
I bet you were the kind of kid who got those things that you could add to a bike from cereal
Spokey
packets.
Dokies.
Yeah, like you would like fix them to your spokes, and then they would like slide up and down on the
Spokey Dokies. Yeah,
is that what they're called? Spokey Dokies.
Spokey Dokies. You got them in packets of Frosties. Yeah,
yeah. And you also have the stuff that you would attach to the spokes, and when the wheel went round, they would kind of rattle.
Yeah,
I mean, we were basically the kids from Stranger Things.
Yeah.
We are the inspiration.
Yeah, that's basically. Yeah, I did decide to. I don't want to say waste, but I did use a lot of my bank holiday weekend staying inside and playing with toy soldiers. Which was...
Have you finished painting them all, Pete?
They've all been finished. I've painted all of them. So in the starter set, you get... So I play Temple of Rokan, which, as I'm sure you'll know, you get 5 models in the starter set. And it took me, on and off, about 6 months to paint them.
Whoa.
How many?
Just the 5. Well, I had to do the whole process, right? So I have not done. I had not done miniature painting.
You had to create the paint.
15 years. Yeah, I had to go and find the oil,
grinding up beetles to get that proper red colour.
Yeah, that's right. I'd not done any miniature painting in like 15 or 16 years. And so this was the first time I'd done it. So I went through the whole process, and this chap from work, he helped me through the whole thing. He was very, very patient. And he showed me how to glue all of them together and not stick my hand to the table, because they're made of... I think
that's kind of rule 101, isn't it? Really? That is basically...
It is, but I do distinctly remember as a child gluing my hand to the desk.
I like the idea of like Pete walking into that first lesson, like dragging a table behind him as it stuck to his hand.
Yeah, this is what happened last time. So they're made of... I think they're called pewter. Maybe they're not. Resin. I don't know. They're sort of metallic, basically. They're this metal rather than plastics that you get. So I had to delicately sort of glue all of them together, and they were a right pain at times because they had really thin bits for the arms. You had to glue all them on, and then when they were all glued properly, I had to spray them to do an undercoat. So you spray them with like a white or a black, and I chose white because white means that the colours that you paint on top of them are slightly brighter, rather than black gives you better shadows. And they're quite a bright, vibrant group. So this Bushido game is like this fantasy orient kind of skirmish game where you only have a few number of characters, so each of the characters is really important. They're all like named, and therefore you have to kind of put a bit of time and effort into them, rather than like these really big games like Gates of Antares and I don't know, some of the bolt action stuff, like where you're basically just painting 20 of the same dude. So these are all very separate. So I went through that, sprayed them, then did all the base colours, which is where you put the different base colours. So like most of them are all brown and green, so like browns and greens, and they're metals.
And Pete,
yep.
when did you start having fun?
So I will admit this.
I did not have fun.
It was kind of like a bell curve. So I was starting to have fun when I purchased them, because I was just like, I'm so excited. I can't...
That's not how a bell curve works, but go on.
Yeah, bell curve is right.
Yeah, a bell curve starts at the bottom, as in I'm not interested.
Well, at the start,
if I had a cathedral and I had bells that were shaped like that,
okay, confession: 2 things, not my strong point. 1, not gluing my hands to desks. 2, maths. So the first part, so at the start of the bell curve is I do not know about the game Bushido.
Yes,
and then I purchased them, an immediate spike. Yep. And I was very, very excited because I've not done any of this miniature wargaming for like a really long time. And then waiting for them to start, and then getting the pack and thinking, oh, I'm going to have so much fun, and starting to read the rules and backstory and all that sort of stuff that comes with the manual. Now, then there was a big drop when I had to like glue them together, because they were really, really fiddly, and I just wasn't used to it, and I was just terrified this entire time that I was just going to like lose bits and like all that sort of stuff. That's mainly because I haven't done it like for ages. And then right back up again, which is
again not how a bell curve works, but go on.
Well, this is my new. This
is a lovely description of what stalactites look like.
I mean,
can we call it the stalactite graph? Is that
no?
Is
it's
that
called
all right?
a sine wave.
Is that what it's called? Sine wave?
It's like a sine wave, yeah.
Okay, it's like a sine wave.
I'll tell you what, Pete, you can draw the graph and we'll put it on Twitter.
Jeez.
All right. Yeah, it'd just be me holding a crayon. Yeah, so, and then, yeah, the painting of it was really fun. I really enjoyed that. And then what you're alluding to, Sam, is when did you actually start playing? And, yeah, that was last weekend. And, oh my God. It's a really great game, but I forgot how...
to play because you spent so long painting.
Yeah. But I forgot how complex miniatures games are. Like, you guys think like tabletop, like board games can be very, very challenging. There are lots of very challenging board games, but miniature games are a different kind of challenging. Like,
in what way?
In the way that Bushido has about 40 pages of rules, and they are all...
It's almost as long as Kerby.
Yeah, it's almost as long as a game of Kerby. And those 40 pages of rules are all very important. And all of the miniatures, they all have statistics that you need to know what they do. They also have traits, as in they do specific things. So, like, in collectible card games, this would be like a keyword in Magic. So it'd be like trample, or, I don't know, an instant or something like that. So they all have keywords and key symbols, and you need to know what they are because they help you figure out what your strategy is in the game. And you're constantly moving back and forth between these, 40-odd pages of rules to try and figure out, okay, how does this phase work? How does this step within this phase work? And a lot of the start of learning a tabletop game like this is that. Like, it is basically like the first game that you play is basically getting that down and like referencing stuff between different books and different cards and all that kind of thing. But I'd forgotten how much I love that kind of thing. I like, it's super nerdy, like really, really geeky to play. And each game did take us about 2 hours.
And were you playing with people who had already had like a familiarity with Bushido?
No, and that was the point. So
what made you all choose Bushido?
Because it looked really neat. My colleague Tom from work basically saw it at UK Games Expo, which I'm hoping to go to this year. And he was like, "This looks really cool," and picked up a pack. And then we were all like, that does look really cool. And then a couple more of us bought it. And then we were like, we should really play this at some point. So then we spent like months and months and months putting it all together. And then we finally, last weekend, actually played a game of it. And yeah, like, it's a really different experience. Like Sam, you were saying, you've said before that like you always want one of each kind of game in your collection. And like miniatures games are a very different thing that I don't think you'll have experienced before. And I'm just trying to think about how you would go about starting that, because like I'd played, tabletop war games a decade and a half before that, and I vaguely knew what I was doing, and it took 2 or 3 hours. Whereas like just somebody new straight out the gate, I have no idea how they would get into it.
I don't think I could ever own it. I think I'd love to play one. I'd like to go to a place. I just love to just play them. It fascinates me.
Yeah,
utterly. I just don't think. For me, it seems like you can't do it very light. It's got to be all in.
Yeah,
to really get the most out of it.
The commitment is like huge. Like it's a massive learning curve, and it's.
And I know Sam's getting married next year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
he's getting a new bathroom fitted.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kris, you are planning the stag, so here we go.
Oh, I know. Do you know what, Dan? I was just thinking that. I was thinking maybe I should run that past Sam.
Bushido stag
idea.
What? Yeah, get loads and loads of tabletop games in. Oh, that'd be great. He'd love
that. Let the gluing commence.
So Dan, what games have you been playing with Toby while the sun is still shining at this hour?
Well, when the sun is still shining, we tend not to spend too much time indoors. We'll kind of take the opportunity to go out and about, even if it's just up the road, go shopping to get him out of the house, or go to kind of coffee shop and stuff like that. I tell you what, now I've got a baby, the coffee shops I go to are very different. In the past, I may have gone to an independent coffee shop, or maybe just a Starbucks or a Costa, whichever one kind of available.
Those famous independent coffee shops, yeah.
Well, I led with independent, and then. In addition to independent coffee shops, there
those
are
mom and
Starbucks
pop coffee shops. Support your local one. Have you been to that Starbucks?
I think you'll find I did lead with the independent. That's obviously where the preference sits. But not everyone has a good independent coffee shop near them. But most people have a branded one near them if they don't have an independent one. Anyway, moving on. The coffee shop instead that I chose to go to is called Jurassic Perk. And Jurassic Perk is a dinosaur-themed coffee shop for children. So you go inside. Depending on the children you take with you, you pay for their entry. So for Toby, he's under 1, so we paid £2. And there's lots of tables that like kind of parents can sit down. But in this coffee shop, adorning all of the walls, and I tell you what, this place has had some money put into it. Even though it's an independent place, it's not obviously a franchise. There's a lot of money gone into it. The walls are all adorned with kind of wood panelling and kind of long grass leaves, and on the ceiling, kind of reaching out from the ceiling, you got all these different dinosaurs, like a T-Rex or a Triceratops or a raptor, just kind of looking at. There's a pterodactyl on the ceiling. These aren't just painted.
No Barney,
these are three-dimensional. What was that?
No Barney.
We're talking proper dinosaurs here.
Yeah, but Kris, they paid the money to have Jeff Goldblum stand there every month and just shake his head and go, "Nature finds a way."
Yeah.
Clever girl.
So you've got that the decoration of the coffee shop is all these dinosaurs, which is amazing. They've got this big kind of soft play area for kind of slightly older children. There's also a large room which has the floor is kind of just covered in like tiny spotlights, which kind of play colourful patterns and stuff that the baby kind of sits on. And I just had a whale of a time in there. I sat there having a cup of tea, having a cup of coffee, just sat in like a room with Toby on the floor, having a great old time. Very different to any other kind of coffee shop I've ever been to.
How much is it to go as an adult? If Toby's £2,
Well,
if I went on my own,
Oh God, your grift.
well,
my
you
great
pay for
independent coffee shop grift.
you pay
We're
for your
branching out,
coffee
Kris.
and your tea and anything you wish to purchase, but just
All
as
right.
an entry fee, you pay nothing as an adult.
All right, brilliant. Well, I'm on board then.
So you're only
I'm
paying
in.
for the child. Obviously, the ages. If you want to use the child facilities, meaning the small soft play area, the baby sensory room, and the light up floor, then yes, you might pay.
Baby, sorry, what's a baby sensory room?
The baby sensory room is a kind of a small room with kind of all the floor is kind of padded, and all
Yeah.
the walls are padded, and then on the walls in different areas they've got certain toys in there, or they've got on one wall like one was kind of material with little lights on it, so the baby can touch it and kind of get kind of that kind of textural feedback. There's like a mirror with lights in it, so the mirror kind of reflects the lights. There's like a large post which kind of changes colour with mirrors, and it just kind of obviously kind of these are for small babies. These are kind of 1-year-olds and younger. It's just kind of that kind of textural element of being able to touch and be able to feel and be able to kind of play and look at all that stuff. And my little boy absolutely loved it. He just sat there, just constantly, just with the wall covered in kind of lights and material, just stroking it for ages, having a whale of a time, just like me.
That sounds
Brilliant.
lovely.
And please tell me that Jurassic Perk has pun-based caffeinated drinks, so like Velocilattes.
Oh, how long have you been sitting on that, Sam? I believe why you've gone quiet.
I'm currently listing it currently looking at a list of other prehistoric animals, trying to make other ones work, but I can't.
I have to say, I went in with my lovely wife and my little boy. I went in immediately, took my shoes off, and went and played with him. And my wife bought the drinks, so I can't say if it was fantastic or not.
Surely
Come on.
there's a T-Rex.
Oh right, yeah, I get it. Yeah, well done. And,
All right, that was a laugh was what I was really going for, rather than like, yes, that's clever. But all right,
I admire the pun that you have made.
yeah, good.
But yeah, I'll tell you what. I'll put a picture on Twitter so people can understand the new type of coffee shop I now
That sounds
frequent.
really nice. That sounds really nice.
It is, and it was really weird just seeing kind of, because obviously adults are kind of going in certain areas to help with their children. So they might go into the soft play area, so the kids if they can't get around and stuff like that. So also all the adults are kind of walking around barefoot as well. And it's just kind of a weirdly really relaxed environment because everyone's there for the same. Everyone's just there to help their kids play and stuff like that, and everyone's kind of really friendly. And it was just like a really strange and enjoyable environment to be in. And dinosaurs.
Triceratops.
yeah, well done. That was a Triceratops. Oh my god.
But yeah, that's how I enjoyed the sunshine of my bank holiday in there. Actually, the only other thing I did was I spent some more time indoors. This time I didn't bring Toby because I don't think it was quite as appropriate. And I enjoyed the Christmas present that my wife bought me at Christmas, which is when generally you
Good.
get Christmas presents.
Again.
That tends to be when
Appropriate
you
time.
get Christmas presents. And she'd bought me and her tickets to the Royal Shakespeare Company to see Macbeth, which was fantastic. So
Oh, is that the one with Chris Eccleston?
yeah, this is Chris Eccleston as Macbeth and Niamh Cusack as Lady Macbeth. And we did have a budget at Christmas. We budgeted kind of £50, and it's the one thing I really, really dislike about theatre. I find it from a cost perspective really quite
Yeah.
restrictive, because I love going to the theatre, but I just can't afford it. And I live in London, where the most phenomenal theatre is, but I just can't afford it. And it needs to be like a really special occasion. So we set ourselves a budget. So obviously that usually rules it out. But she was able to get like really cheap tickets with kind of restricted view. And often restricted view, it's actually not that restricted. I did send you guys a picture of my view, which literally had a large post going directly down the centre of the stage.
Oh, man.
So I just spent the entire... Don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed it. I did spend most of the time kind of leaning side to side around the post, depending on where the action was taking place. But hey, I got to see the RSC for £15, so you know what? That's all right.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Macbeth's a good play.
It is. It's one of kind of mine and my wife's favourites. Obviously, we all have a history with Macbeth.
We've all been in it.
That's.
We were all in the same production of it.
It's kind of where
about 11 years ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of where I met properly Kris and Pete.
Yeah.
Because I knew Sam prior to that. I'd met Kris a couple of times, and I'd met Pete once and thought he was a knob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second meeting didn't
That's
help.
my... That's
Takes about 15 or 16 meetings to really...
I'll be honest.
Because his hand was glued to a table at the time, which is why.
exactly. Yeah, I'll be honest.
Bloody, what an idiot!
That is the generally the first impression is always this guy's a knob that I get. But I like to think I sort of grind them down with.
The first time I
charm.
met you was at an audition, and we were both waiting outside to audition for a play. And you were kind of just there saying, "Yeah, I've got a place to be. I'm gonna have to just kind of like skip through this, you know. I mean, I'm really busy. I'm really just kind of nonchalantly, yeah. I do these auditions
like
all the time. Yeah, I'm just kind of here.
These miniatures won't paint themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
I've
Yeah,
got places to be.
But I remember Pete, in that play. That was that one night we did the performance where you thought you'd done a scene that you hadn't yet done. So you were out of your costume, sat in the green room, reading a magazine, while I was upstairs waiting for you to come on stage with me, and you just weren't there. And we were just panicking, me and the other actors. We were like, okay, I know his lines, so we can just distribute them amongst us. I mean, the fact that he's King Duncan is a bit of an oversight, because he is crucial to the plot at this point. Yeah. And then suddenly you come running past us on stage without your costume, which really confused the school kids that we were performing to.
I like to keep people on their toes. Like an element of danger, I always found, really adds to theatrical performances. Like, it can get really staid and stale if you just like every night, the same lines over and over again, the same emotions, the same staging. What you want sometimes is for a man to basically just like entirely forget to bother walking out onto stage at the right time, just to keep everyone thinking, there's a bit of danger here. I'll be honest with you, William Shakespeare didn't write any of his he didn't write any of his scripts down. So I think I was basically keeping to the spirit of the bard a lot more than you guys.
I'm pretty sure he wrote his scripts down.
No, he didn't. Like the ones that we have surviving, apart the first folio weren't written directly down by him. Not most of them.
Well
anyway.
written, but he did write his stuff down.
No, he didn't.
He didn't just make it up on the hoof.
He did. No,
incredible. They had incredible memories in the Elizabethan period.
I've literally just finished. Finished reading James Shapiro's book, 1599: A Year in the Life of Shakespeare, a professor of Shakespeare, in which he states about Shakespeare's writing process and how he would do several drafts of different plays. What you're confusing is the fact that in Shakespeare's time, because paper was such a rare commodity, the whole play wouldn't be written out as it is now. So actors would only be given their lines and the scenes that they were in, which is why you get lots of weird things in Shakespeare, like, you have stabbed me, because they need to tell the actor that, bloody hell, I've been stabbed, because there's no directions, there's no general.
But Sam,
in terms of creating the first folio, it was curated from all these little bits that came down. But to say that Shakespeare never wrote anything down, it's just ridiculous.
But Sam, who are you? Right, I know I'm right, and who are you going to believe? Me or James Shapiro, PhD?
Also, can I just throw my hat in the ring? I actually gave a lecture on Macbeth a couple of weeks ago to my first years.
Yeah. Here's a fun fact for you kids. Shakespeare. Here's a fun fact for you kids. Before this lecture, put your pens down. But Mr. Kris, we need this for the... No. Because Shakespeare never wrote anything down.
It's not how he would have done it.
Neither are you. But Mr. No. Kris, no. Put it down.
Yeah.
But
He just had a good. That's how he memorised all of his stuff. He just had a really good memory.
Here's a fun fact though. Do you know why the play is superstitious? Well, it's a superstition because the director we had, he would refuse to name the play. Do you remember?
Oh yeah.
It's because that generally, if a theatre was in trouble, like they weren't earning enough money from ticket sales, they would just throw on Macbeth because it was a guaranteed floor filler. Because you would have, it's a short play, small cast, there's death in it, and audiences more or less knew the plot. So that's generally why it has a superstition. So generally if theatres were staging Macbeth, I'm not saying the RSC is in trouble, but generally if theatres were staging Macbeth, it meant that they were financially in some difficulty.
Well, I'm sure the RSC have got to perform Macbeth at some point. Like,
yeah. Get through all the ones where everyone's like, okay, yeah, this is quaint, but we don't really want,
Give us the
Titus
big guns.
Andronicus. Yeah, we want the big boys.
How do we know? He didn't write anything down.
No, exactly. It's an absolute astonishment that we have any of his stuff left.
Just off book instantaneously.
Yeah. Is everyone off book? Yes, because I am.
Eccleston and Niamh Cusack were fantastic. The supporting cast, well, all the main characters and the main actors were great. Supporting cast, not so much.
What about my man Keith Ness?
I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea who played Keith Ness or Menteith.
No one does.
Do you know, one of my favourite things, and this has not been self-indulgent, one of my favourite things to happen, I always use the example with students about how the stage management team can be too literal with the instructions that is given to them by the director, is when our mate Tim, who was playing the porter in that scene, he was supposed to walk on and, urinate. It's the only bit of comedy in the scene, in the play, and it's often cut. And he was like, how am I going to urinate on stage? And the director was like, oh, just get a lemon. So the stage management team ran off, and so we did the porter scene. Tim walks on, stands his back to the audience, legs wide, and then we see him struggling. We can't understand why, and then, a couple of pips fall down.
It's like a dribble of liquid.
Rather than because the director meant a Jiffy lemon, for Pancake Day, and they'd given him a whole lemon to just squeeze in his hands.
Oh God! Oh God! Oh, God of War. Sam, I just got the greatest. That was the greatest transition ever. That's the greatest transition I've ever done.
Is
From
it?
Jif Lemon pissing pips to God of War.
Yeah.
Who and Kratos would have no problem passing pips.
He would. Well, he'd be angry about it. He's angry about everything. He's angry about everything.
Pips for breakfast.
Do you think? Now, obviously, we'll talk about the game in a moment. But do you think Dan can learn anything from God of War, being a new dad and all?
If he wants to be a standoffish dad,
which I do,
then definitely. I mean, it's kind of a weird experience, God of War, because this is the first since Kratos was tricked into killing his first family.
Spoilers.
Yeah. And then went on a rampage about it for 3 games. This is the first one where he's got a family and he has a small child called Atreus. But because he's Kratos and Kratos is Kratos, he's still not kind of down with the whole being a dad thing.
Right.
So they go hunting and they go killing together on rampages. It's a testament to how well the story's written and directed in general. And Atreus is always pleading for his dad's praise and attention while they're both still grieving for the death of Atreus's mum and Kratos' wife. And Kratos it just portrays this really, really well. Just you can see on Kratos' face him fighting the natural parental and paternal urge to reward and encourage his offspring against his just natural the fact he is a god who is bred for war. The two ends of the magnet just don't just are constantly fighting against each other in this game, and it's absolutely fantastic.
What, like,
and it's kind of
like a sitcom?
Not like a sitcom. No, it's not like love me, Dad.
Like
no, son.
It sounds like they're the ultimate. It sounds like they're like the ultimate odd couple.
Terry and June.
No, because it's not really that they're at odds to each other. Because the whole premise of the game is that they're getting Kratos' wife's ashes to the top of the mountain. So they're both like wanting and trying to achieve the same thing. It's just, Atreus is this kid who's been like sick a lot of his life, and it's not like Kratos never shows him any compassion. Like, he's very protective over him and just doesn't want him to get in any danger. But you also get the impression that he's not quite the son that he wanted. Like, he's very sensitive to a lot of the sort of mystical and magical things that are going on within this universe,
right?
And that's stuff that was passed down to him from his mum. So I think where Kratos' standoffishness comes from is not a sense that he is not really a sense that he's at odds with Atreus. It's just like Atreus is his link to his wife that has passed on, and I think that's probably more of what he is challenging with than the fact that he doesn't like him or the fact that like he doesn't love him. It's the fact that like this is his last link, and he kind of wants to put Atreus at arm's length and kind of get him at a point where he can protect himself, hence like scared of losing him basically.
Right.
But yeah, it's absolutely incredible, and each one of you would find something in this game to love, even if you've previously not been any fan of the God of War series. I think it's the best game I played this year, hands down. And to kind of put it in really reductive terms, which I'm sure is what Santa Monica Studios would love.
Yeah,
is it's basically the best game Naughty Dog never made, and it's unique at the moment in the fact that it's definitely one of a very rare bunch of games which is a exclusive, like, first party title for a console that isn't a like paid for service game and isn't an open world and isn't a Destiny or a Fortnite or anything like that. It's a completely coherent, structured story that takes you on a journey from beginning to end and is very deliberate and it's very well designed. And it's kind of weird that those games don't exist anymore.
I've kind of talked about it in the past. I think when I talked about playing Titanfall, it was because seemingly all the big games were these expansive open world kind of, you have to put 40-odd hours into it to really kind of get everything you need from it. And that's, for a lot of time, that's just, I don't have that time to put in that level of... And those kind of games, if you step out of it for any length of time, it's a struggle to get back into it, because when you jump back in, you don't then have the learning curve that you get at the start of every game. So it's what, as you're pointing out there, it's nice to have a narrative-driven game, which you do get. And open world games are all well and good. I'm super, super excited about Red Dead Redemption 2. It's like one of my most looking forward to games. But there's so much out there that sometimes it's just too much.
I don't think it's a coincidence that this is Sony's fastest selling exclusive. I think the market is massively hungry for this kind of game, I think, and especially as the big publishers like Activision and EA and Ubisoft are all about kind of like the new what's it called, Beyond Good and Evil is a procedurally generated open world like adventure game, and it's like, well, does everything... Are you saying
that the gaming community is getting agoraphobic, Sam?
Yeah, well, not that. It's just that games now are being designed as, well, big like AAA games are being designed as a service, and so it's just like, so they're expecting you to buy a game like, for example, the next Call of Duty, which they've completely, it's not going to have a single player on the next Call of Duty because it's going to be an always online multiplayer. It's probably definitely going to have a battle royale mode, and the idea is that the company wants you to invest loads of time into it in order to get stuff out of it. Or it's like a free-to-play model like Fortnite, where you've got to invest all the time into it, putting money in for microtransactions in order to get stuff out of it. And it's not that people are getting agoraphobic, it's just no one's got the time to dedicate to these massive, huge games that are like a game to service. So when something comes along, which is God of War, which is, admittedly, it's still a 25, 30-hour experience, but it's a crafted experience. From the ground up, it's like, it takes you on a journey. Everything has been so finely tuned.
So it's like an epic novel that you can kind of dip into without having to kind of buy the whole of the series necessarily. To really appreciate.
I don't necessarily think that it's true that like people don't have the time for all of the for these games that are games as service, these Fortnites and stuff. I think it's more like we've had such a glut of them that we don't have time for all of them. Like,
yeah, that's what I mean. Like that, but you just contravene your own point by saying they don't. It's not that we don't have time. It's not
that we don't have time for that kind of game individually.
No. We don't have time for all of them.
For all of them, right? Okay, so I follow you.
So when something comes along which is so focused and pointed, like God of War is, I think people are just snapping it up because it's kind of like, right, this is something I can get on board with. This is something I know is going to end.
Right. Yeah.
And give me and give me some finality. Whereas like Destiny and
Assassin's Creed,
they're all kind of quite repetitive. They can be quite repetitive though as well. I think what you're saying is with a narrative, the narrative is bringing you back as opposed to the gameplay. With some of those more repetitive games, you're going back to increase your character. So if you miss a day, it's not a big problem. Whereas with a narrative, you want to go back to it. You want to find out what's going to happen next. And I think using the comparison with Naughty Dog, as you say, I think the publishers of God of War will be as happy about that. That's what Naughty Dog have kind of built their success on in recent years, in the kind of their last load of games, built on the narrative and pushing forward. So Pete, you want to play more because you want to know what's going to happen next.
Wow.
And I think this is probably a better game than anything Naughty Dog have done recently. Ooh. I think it's a better game than Uncharted 4, certainly. And they do steal heavily from the DNA of Naughty Dog games. So, for example, most of the action centres around the Lake of Nine, which is a lake in Norse mythology which connects the 9 realms. So if you've seen any of the Thor films, like all of this is immediately kind of familiar in terms of like the 9 realms and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like that level in Uncharted 4 where you're going around that area in the desert, looking at places and discovering things, but times by 10. So it's not quite an open world. It's just a really finely crafted hub area, which has room where you're encouraged to explore. And everything you explore, there's something to find there and a little bit of story and narrative to go with it, which is what Uncharted did really well. But this is kind of like, okay, pushed even further. Like they pushed the envelope to really explore what that possibility could be. And there's other things that, like, you know, in Uncharted 4 where you would be having a conversation and then you jump out of the car and then when you got back in, the conversation would start exactly where it ended up. This has the same thing, but instead of having conversations, someone's telling. There's a character that joins you in the boat, and as you're travelling from area to area, he'll be sharing like old Norse legends with your son. And like when you get out, like Kratos is really like, "There's no time for stories now, boy." And then the guy will be like, "Oh, okay then." And then when you get back in the boat, like he'll start the story up again from exactly where he left off.
That's cool.
And so and it's just like all those really lovely things in Uncharted that Naughty Dog did that grounded the player within the world. But Santa Monica Studios have kind of taken that and gone, right, how can we really kind of implement them, where they were like, in Uncharted it kind of felt like there were sort of proofs of concept that these are things that could work. Like here they're really well established within the DNA of the game. And there's other things, like one of the things that impressed me so much about Lost Legacy is how the interaction between the two characters there. So if you were doing a puzzle, the character who wasn't doing the puzzle, Nadine, would be like kind of like, "Oh, I think you're on the right path with this." Or, "No, hang on." Or if you'd gone wrong, she'd be saying, "Oh, no, you did exactly what you did last time. That's where you went wrong." It'd be brilliant. There's like a character within this game that's telling me where I'm getting stuff wrong and right. And I thought that's a really, rather than having like a blinking light or a hint system which tells you where I'm going wrong, it's a character within the thing. And that's what Atreus does in God of War, but he's there doing it all the time. Like he's going to like Kratos, like, "Oh, maybe we should like move there," and like Kratos is kind of like, "Don't tell me what to do, boy," but secretly like, "Yeah, I think actually you're on the right path." And I think the biggest technical achievement of God of War, and the thing that astounds me the most, and Santa Monica Studio have a really rich heritage of being able to, again, with the Naughty Dog comparison continues, of being able to push the console that they're working on really, really hard.
Yeah.
It was a reason why I played God of War 3, because it was an example of a game that really pushed the PS3 to its sort of peak performance. And God of War just is, my fan on my PS4 is on pretty much constantly while this game is running, because it's pushing the graphics on this far beyond really any depth of fidelity that Uncharted was doing. And the technical achievement that they do this on, and I think, Dan, you'd really love this, I know Kris really loves this as an idea, is the entire game takes place in one single camera shot. The camera never breaks away, it never cuts, it never leaves Kratos' side, there's no blackout loading screens. The camera is there all the time in exactly the same
I would
tracking position. And I just think that is, and it's like someone standing there with a handycam on Kratos' shoulder the whole game
for 30 hours
and never breaks away, and it has such a profound effect on how you view Kratos, because it just grounds the game. The Russos in I was watching a documentary about the Russos and filming stuff in Avengers Infinity War, and they were saying in this one scene that it's in the scene where Thor meets the Guardians, and they were like, because this is a scene featuring very fantastical characters, we used a handycam so it grounded the shot, so it didn't like add anything to their supernaturalness or their spaciness. So use a handycam to like ground the shot and make it feel very real, feel very human. And I feel like that's exactly what Santa Monica Studios gone with their like tracking shot, because it makes you feel very real, very in the moment, whereas in previous God of War games you kind of just feel like a little bit like an ant in a like just doing hack and slash stuff. You never really get a real sense of Kratos' power. And then finally the other really satisfying great is his axe, and it's the fact that Kratos has a Leviathan axe that acts exactly like Mjolnir, and you throw it, and no matter where you throw it, no matter what you do with it, you press a button and it calls back straight to his hand. And that is just it's the most satisfying feeling I've ever had in a game, like just throwing an axe into an enemy and then waiting for another enemy to come in front of it, calling it back so it goes through that other enemy, and then you kill them both at the same time.
That's cool.
Or like I'll just be like, oh, you know that scene in Thor Ragnarok where Thor calls his hammer while he's in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and you hear it like crashing through all the things as you're waiting for it to come back when it finally comes to his hand. Like I just do that. I'll just wander around, throw the axe, like carry on wandering with Atreus for 5 or 10 minutes, and then just call the axe and just like stand there waiting, like do 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 do, hearing all this like and just calling it back. It's absolutely fantastic. I recommend all of you to play it. Such a good game.
I certainly this wasn't really on my radar. That's something I wanted to play. You certainly made me want to play it now. I've never played any of the God of War series.
No.
Does that matter?
I think it would only matter in narratively, no. But I think it would only matter in terms of the combat. I would recommend this game to you, Dan, in every single way. And the only thing I'd worry about, and it's the same with Kris, is that I worry that you wouldn't find the combat very easy to get on with. The closest sort of comparison I can give it to is it's a lot like the close quarters combat in Horizon Zero Dawn. So it's based on like heavy and light attacks, and mixing up those with blocking and parrying your enemies in order to get like a advantage in to kill them. But saying that, it's also quite forgiving, so you can just, if you're in a bind, you can just kind of like spam quite a lot of the time.
Would you compare it in any way? I'm trying to think of, because I haven't played Horizon Zero Dawn either, so I'm trying to just think of games potentially that so similar. Would you compare it to something like the combat system from the Arkham games, the Batman Arkham games? Or am I just completely off any different direction with that?
A little bit. You do get things like notice when an enemy's like behind you and a chance to block them. There's no sort of focus on it as being as fluid as the Arkham game. So in the Arkham, you just pressed a button when an enemy was on you, and Batman would just turn around and automatically block. That's more of a manual process. in here, but then you're also never really in a position where you're being like crowded by so many enemies. At least not in the early game. By the time that you're experiencing bigger monsters and bigger enemies, then you would have learnt the abilities to handle them at the time. That everything is kind of drip fed to you quite early on, so you do get a good handle of how the combat works, and it is satisfying enough that it's just really it's really enjoyable to play, and you can just like spam enemies with your axe from afar and do stuff like that, and Atreus fires arrows to like stun other enemies and keep them off your back. So I think they've made a very conscious effort to put things in that help the player with the combat. I think it's probably it will be the only sticking point for some people to enjoy it, maybe.
Why, you can consider this a new addition to my gaming wish list.
Good.
Peter.
Hello.
Peter.
Hello. That's me.
Do you like Agatha Christie books?
I do like Agatha Christie books.
Loves him a bit of Poirot.
Okay.
I love a little bit.
A bit of Poirot. Daniel is actually holding up there the book that I'm about to talk about, because I bought it him lest we forget, as his Secret Santa.
Oh.
And it's one. Have you ever had that where you bought a gift for a mate and thinking, actually, I really wanted that?
Yeah.
I have to say, Chris, before we get into this, and before I haven't read the book yet. When I got it, we did a Secret Santa. I'm doing other stuff. I'm a busy boy. We had a Secret Santa where we had to kind of give an idea of what we wanted. I think I asked for an interesting novel, something that was a bit different. Yeah. What I didn't want was kind of just a bog standard crime novel. And when I opened up this gift, at first glance, it appeared to be a bog standard crime novel.
Bloody hell, Kris!
Yeah.
And obviously, I still haven't read it, but I now understand a bit more about it, and I know it's no longer a bog standard crime novel. So I take back my original kind of harumph thing.
You're retracting it.
Any initial harumph thing, I sincerely take back.
Okay, so this is a book by Anthony Horowitz, and it's a love letter to Agatha Christie. If you're a big fan of murder mysteries, and as it's getting hotter outside, as we talked about before, the light is lingering onwards even more so now.
And Pete's playing Manhunt
to read.
So
yeah, and it's a great book to read by the pool as a kind of a summer holiday read. Right. It's kind of light and frothy, and that's not to render it a disservice. It's perfect for those people who, like myself, love a bit of Agatha Christie as a kind of...
Chris, is it really? Because you were reading this on the great European trip, and you described it...
It was to really balance out the curse of Peter.
Yeah, but you described it to me as a book within a book, which to me doesn't scream Holiday by the Sun read, or wherever I'm by. Like if I've got to, but Kris, if I've got to hold two narratives in my head, which I'm more than capable of doing, but like that's not generally the light and frothy reading that.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's not like to the extent to say something like David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, which is like this Russian doll of stories. But basically, it's written from the point of view of an editor who is working for a publishing house, and one of their most popular authors, who's a murder mystery writer, has just submitted a manuscript, and she's looking forward to reading it. And then you actually read the whole novel within that, right. And it is like a love letter to Poirot. It's like Midsummer Murders. It's set in this little sleepy village, and a murder has taken place, and you introduced all the different characters, and you find yourself kind of plotting, okay, who did this, who did that, this kind of thing. And then the book just ends before you've got to that final reveal.
Right.
And you're like, oh, okay, I'm back with the editor now. And she is equally as frustrated as you are. And she realises, and it says this on the blurb at the back of the book, so I'm not spoiling it, that the author had hidden aspects of their life in this book. So as well as the kind of the mystery, the traditional murder mystery that you have to solve, you're also trying to solve the mystery as to this author, what happened to them and their life, and what has been hidden within the novel you've just read within this novel. And the rest of the book is not only trying to find that last chapter to get that kind of resolve, but it's also about trying to kind of piece together the life of this author who wrote this book. So it's this really interesting novel within a novel. It's a love letter, as I said before, to Agatha Christie. So it's very self-aware of the subject matter it's ripping off. And for me, who's brought up reading Agatha Christie, you kind of get that lovely kind of thrill of that kind of knowledge of that fact. There's something quite lovely about that, reading it. So it's for those who love murder mysteries and you want two for the price of one, then I can recommend The Magpie Murders.
So the thing I like about Agatha Christie novels is that they sparkle with this kind of speed and very... You understand who the characters are very, very quickly because she kind of works a fair bit with stereotypes. Not in anything that I've read.
I mean,
there's a little bit
the
of that.
Rule of Four is a pretty dodgy example. No, not the Rule of Four. The Big Four is a pretty dodgy example.
Yeah. So she also, but she does it a lot with. So, for example, with Murder on the Orient Express, you understand who those characters are within a couple of pages of like meeting them, right? Like you get them and who they motivate. What start to think about what those motivations are.
I mean, it's a nice book. It's a good book for the summer holiday. It's not Wittgenstein, but what is?
No, yeah.
Thank Christ, in all honesty,
that someone else isn't reading that book. At least you're not reading It by Stephen King, which is...
I've read that book. That is a war of attrition.
Yeah, it is. It literally is. It's really. I mean, it's interesting, but I keep on reading it before I go to bed, and it's not the best book to read before you go to bed. Because Stephen King has a wonderful habit of writing long, boring, drawn-out scenes where nothing much happens, which are actually quite relaxing and meditative.
Right.
And then suddenly a vampire will turn up that's got razor blades for teeth. And
Sweet.
And then it's kind of like, wow, really? Well, I'm not reading for a bit. So I've decided to mitigate that by reading. I've found myself reading a lot of science fiction books because I think that. Even though I enjoy reading horror, I think that like science fiction is just horror for wimps.
Right.
Because it is, isn't it? Because all horror books is science fiction books, but you don't have to explain the science behind it. It's just like, oh yeah, this thing can do this now. Isn't that scary? Like it's like magic, but it can kill you.
A number of Hugo Award winners are currently spinning in their graves, but yeah, all right.
I've been reading a book which I think was like one of the first translated, or maybe one of the first Chinese books to be awarded the Hugo Award.
Right.
The Three-Body Problem, written by Cixin Liu, and which I probably butchered as a pronunciation, but my God, it's an incredible book. It is one of the best science fiction books I've read in a long time, and I've recently read a massive glut of them, as I was saying. So I read The Power by Naomi Alderman, which I've lent to Kris, and if you've read and liked World War Z, then you'll love that book. That's incredible. Brilliant. That imagines a world where women find out that they can, all the female population find out that they can generate electricity from their hands, and how that changes the gender imbalance and power struggles within society. But it's written a lot like World War Z, as in like from diary format. And then I read The Expanse, which I've got the second one to read, and Interworld, which is Neil Gaiman's and Michael Reeves' sort of science fiction young adult novel, which is okay. But The Three-Body Problem was absolutely fantastic. I was halfway through it before I ordered the second one in the trilogy.
The Four-Body Problem.
It's difficult to describe, because if you like sci-fi, and especially sort of very hard sci-fi in a way, like that Expanse level of of almost you could believe this science existing and it is possible in the real world, then this is essentially like the next sci-fi book that you should read. It's set in the backdrop of the Cultural Revolution in China in the late 1960s. A time when like science and free thinking was very much on the back burner, was considered against the revolution, that like these Western ideals and, you know, the fact that like Einstein was banned from visiting China, and that all plays into these thoughts that like people who had these like radical ideas of how the world works, that wasn't accepted as part of like the Chinese culture at the time. So that's the sort of the staging of this book, and it uses that idea of science being becoming a very controlled thing and very marginalized thing, and how that and the effect that has on the world, because obviously like it plays on it and imagines like a future that obviously we don't exist with. It's a science fiction book, and it plays with the idea of like, do we actually, and I think you would like it for this reason, Pete, like, do we actually deserve the world that we inhabit, considering the way that we've treated it?
Right, okay.
And, like, what role science has played in, and especially, like, the curtailing of science and the stranglehold of it, what effect that's had on our like, progression throughout the world, and how we use science. Like, instead of creating, like, environmental... in ways to like save the environment, instead we created the atom bomb and all that kind of stuff. And there's so much more that happens in the book, but I really don't want to say anything because of how the book plays out. Anything really revelatory I say in it happens in about the third act. Like, everything kind of builds up to this massive moment where there's this big sea change of where you realise where everything's been leading to. And, like, science aside, and what it has to say about our role as sort of sort of lodgers on this planet, and how we've treated it, and if we deserve to actually stay on it as a species. Like, just as a book, it's really well paced, and some weird translating aside, like, it's such an interesting read, and like how it plays out is really interesting, to the point where I generally didn't know where it was going to go until the end, and I just finished it today, and I can't wait to read the second part, because how it essentially is going to be playing out is just incredibly interesting as a narrative. So yeah, if you like sci-fi, I recommend that, and if you like the murder, then that's that Magpie one that Kris was talking about.
Well, talking about award winners, I'm just finishing up because you got me that Dune video game, Sam.
Oh, all right. Are you reading Dune?
Yeah, because I thought I better prepare before I start playing it.
Well, that's the Peter Willington way,
right? And it's a Nebula. It was the first Nebula Award winner, and it was a Hugo Award winner. And apparently there's a movie in it with Sting or something like that.
Yeah, there's also a very good miniseries that Sci-Fi did years ago.
Apparently there's that, but I didn't go in for any of that. I got the audiobook instead of the first one, and it's been a while since I read Sci-Fi, but it feels way more fantasy than Sci-Fi. Like, it's really neat. Have any of you read it?
No.
Oh, no, I'm familiar with the movie, but
it's so epic. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't consider that's the thing. Like, I wouldn't consider that really a sci-fi. I think, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? Because it kind of like plays on science fiction, does straddle this boundary between horror and fantasy.
Yep.
Where it's like, it can ground itself in a little bit of science. Like, The Expanse and the three-body problem do it because they are actually playing on, like, The Expanse plays on the actual effect space travel would have on the human body.
Yep.
And that plays into the narrative, like, characters can't get from this place to this place without suffering these consequences, or they literally can't do this because of physics.
Yep.
And in the three-body problem, it's kind of like the antagonist in it is able to affect the Earth this way because of how they've used science to get to that point, and they use science as a political tool. So that to me makes more sense as science fiction, whereas Dune has always struck me as a fantasy novel, as a science-based fantasy novel, because it's got giant worms in and spice.
I think the thing that I've really appreciated about it is it's starting to make me understand why people who like regular things like Game of Thrones.
Okay, what do you mean by regular things?
Well, like things where like the like stuff that's in the general sort of common parlance. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff that people are like into at the moment, right? Like I can totally see why people are into Game of Thrones, because in Dune, it is all about like deception and intrigue and people murdering one another, and like characters who you think are going to stick around for a really long time, like getting it in the back, like within like halfway through the book, and it's thrilling. I'm getting towards the end of it now, and there's like 4 or 5 more of these that were written by Frank Herbert, and then there were a few more by his son, who. Side note, I reckon he edits the Wikipedia page, because like, every single time Frank Herbert is mentioned in relation to Dune, there's always a brackets at the end, and the follow-up books by his son. like, and it's like, hello. But I see those, and I'm getting that jonesing of like leaning into this as a series, because like I'm not going to, because I've already got too much to be getting on with, but like not for a while anyway. But I can see this being like a big book. I've never been into a big book series since the Willard Price adventure books, so yeah, like it feels like a really interesting. It feels fun to actually kind of understand why people like reading a series, which is just something I've not really been into for a while. By the way, the dinosaur and cafe related pun you're looking for is Yinlong Island iced tea. It's the best I've come up with for the last.
Well, that's a cocktail.
First 45 minutes. No, Long Island iced tea is like a tea based beverage, right?
It's a cocktail.
It's a cocktail.
Oh, bollocks. That's taking me an hour.
Which I'm sure they're serving in Dan's local independent child and adult.
What was the dinosaur aspect of the pun?
Oh, wait. I could do better. Yinlong Black. Long Black is apparently like a kind of... is another name for an Americano.
What's Yinlong?
A Yinlong, or hidden dragon, was a 1.2 metre long ceratopian herbivorous Chinese found mid-Jurassic dinosaur.
This is just knowledge straight off the dome, isn't it?
That was Staying In with Dan Frost, Sam Turner, Peter Willington and myself, Kris Darby. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to us. We are on Apple Podcasts, Mixcloud, Acast, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify. So what better way to make sure you don't miss another episode? If you'd like to leave us a review too, we'd be really grateful. Visit stayingin.podbean.com for more information and links to all the things we've covered in this episode. And come find us on Facebook or on Twitter @StayingInPod. Thanks for listening.